5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 24. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talents. The podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss, and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. One size doesn't fit all. What Airbnb or Google do around the employee experience may not be applicable in a smaller company. This is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Scott Burns, speaking with me from the Twin Cities. Scott is the former CEO of GovDelivery, which he grew from 0 to 200 employees and sold for $153 million. And presently is the CEO and co-founder of Structural, a SaaS startup pioneering employee engagement success management. Today with Scott, we will talk about how the segmentation of your workforce enable you to customize communications and the overall employee experience. Why we need great employee experience to create great customer experience. How important it is to see EX as a strategy for growth. And how to use people data and technology to drive collaboration and assemble high-performing teams. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. For more information, visit fusionalliance.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Scott. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast and you will find us there. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Scott Burns from Structural. Scott is the CEO and co-founder, and Structural is an employee success management platform that transforms engagement from free snacks, high fives, and smiles to sustainable growth in career opportunity, revenue, and profits. Scott, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So tell us a bit more about who you are, what your background is, and what Structural does exactly.
Sure. I started my career, it goes back actually even as far back as college. I was working on one of the campuses. It was one of the first campuses to be connected, and we were using email and other new digital technologies to really engage people on campus, to get more active in politics, to do different kinds of things we thought they should do. And the reason I mentioned that background is that sort of started my thinking on the power of tools and technology and connectivity to really change people's behavior and also to get them to engage in anything, whether it be work, politics, play, or anything else. When I left that experience, I went and worked on a startup company for a little while. We grew that from where I was the 8th person employed to 40, and it was a very fast, rapid growth time. And again, I was impressed with the technology potential to actually change the industry we were working in at that time. But I had in my mind that we could put this technology to a greater purpose. So that company had been focused on renter screening, actually screening people to see whether they could qualify for an apartment. And I learned a lot during that time, but I left from there to work at a company called GovDelivery, where I was one of the founders. It helped get this business started, and we grew it from the basement to 250 people over a long period of time. And what GovDelivery did is basically use digital technology to help governments communicate and get people to do everything from move their car to buy health insurance to get a fishing license or whatever. Again, very impressed, and it really helped move me and move the business that the technology was getting better all the time for helping our clients. But in parallel, I was having this experience, first as a young organizer, then in this work experience of growing a company from startup to 40 people, and then in the experience of growing GovDelivery from 0 to 250 people, of watching the technology we were using in marketing and sales and other areas take off, while the technology that we were using to actually motivate our own people and understand our own people, I felt wasn't keeping up with the demands and the changes that were happening in our workplace. So my background has been in growing and being involved in technology ventures as they grow. The inspiration for the work I'm doing now is really that I think that it's a shame that Amazon often knows more about our employees than we do. And I wanted to tackle that problem head on. And I want to, 3-5 years from now, when people are using Structural, I want leaders and teams to feel like they know the person in the cube next to them and in the same role, but in a different country, as well as Amazon would expect to know them today. So that's that's the inspiration. There's a lot more to it than that in terms of what we learned along the way, but maybe that gives you a little sense of how I got here.
What is Structural then, and how does it work?
The way it works is basically we are capitalizing on the fact that there's a lot of data available on every person, right? We know if you think of the data available on that employee that's in the office next door in your company, somewhere is stored all the data in their LinkedIn profile, their background, their history, everything you could grab from a resume. Then you know maybe how many Twitter followers they have or what they write about in their professional blog. Then the company stores information on their performance, maybe previous projects they've worked on, different assignments they've had, different jobs they've had. The individual, maybe in Facebook or elsewhere, knows exactly what books they've read that they think are relevant to work, what TV shows they're interested in, what hobbies they have. That individual knows what they want to learn, what they want to teach, all of those things. And I sort of think of this really fragmented, different types of data that we have on individuals from those different sources, and they've been sort of trapped in silos. So Structural, quite simply, just pulls all of that data together and creates a really nice, organized profile on every individual that you can then have in the palm of your hand. And once you have that as a manager, as a leader, or as a colleague, you can search across your entire organization and find the right person at the right time to get the job done, whether it's solving a problem or pursuing new business. You can find people to connect with on shared interests or overlapping interests. You can find a mentor. You can also just learn about somebody so you can be more adaptive as a colleague or a manager to their personality or to their own development needs. And when you empower people with that, we're just finding with the clients we have today that there's a much deeper sets of relationships that can form within companies. And that on top of that, people find they actually are able to promote themselves and find the kinds of work that are truly inspiring and motivating to them within the companies they're at, rather than go out on LinkedIn and look for the next job at the next company to fulfill their hopes and dreams professionally.
As you mentioned a bit earlier, internal communications is a big challenge in any organization. The bigger the company is, the more challenges there are. whether it's top to bottom communication or bottom up communication, what are the challenges and solutions that you've seen or experienced?
Having run GovDelivery for 17 years, that big experience I had, we started that in 2000. We grew it from 0 to 250 people, but it didn't happen overnight. It was from 2000 to 2017. So we saw a lot of different challenges in internal communications. Mm-hmm. And speaking from that experience only, the challenges we had were, they fell in a couple different categories. The first was just that people have varying interests and demands in terms of how much they want to know about what's going on around the company. And so I think one challenge we had is we were often trying to communicate on a one-size-fits-all basis, when in fact we had very different segments of employees who had very different levels of interest in terms of what they understood about what the company was up to. So that's one challenge, is just customizing the communication that you have to tailor it to the interests of the individual. I think the second thing is that communication is very driven from the top down in a lot of companies still to this day. And you asked what tools I've seen to help. I think that Slack and Yammer and tools, messaging systems like that have really changed the communication structure within companies from being top down to being more employee driven. And I think that's a really positive trend. So these are systems for people who aren't familiar with them. Slack allows you to chat directly with people and to form groups of people that you can chat with online. But the neat part about chat is that about Slack, is that you can make a lot of those conversations open and transparent. And by doing that, you're actually allowing that transparency to help you segment your employees, because some employees are going to want to look around and see what other people are talking about and working on, and others will kind of stay in their lane. And that's fine. That allows people to kind of self-serve and segment. And so I think that, the first challenge of segmentation and trying to apply one-size-fits-all communication is a challenge. This sort of second piece of being top-down is another challenge, but is being solved by new tools like Slack and Yammer. And then I think the third challenge is that people generally are going to feel driven and motivated, at least in knowledge work type of environments. They're going to feel driven and motivated when they feel a real sense of alignment with the mission of the company and the work that's happening. And I think that people overinvest in communications and telling the employees, leaders overinvest in telling employees where the leader wants to head, and underinvest in convincing employees that it's the right place to go. And so I think that's really not a tool that solves that as much as a strategy that I think opens up that discussion beyond just the executive team to decide where the company is going to head and how it's going to get there, to sort of less of a command control idea and more of a big vision. But we all get there, understand it, and get there together. Start with why, as you would kind of hear in the popular business literature. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important, and people often don't get it right. And that's something we're trying to address. But I'm also excited to see tools like Slack flipping the model so it's more employee driven now than ever.
It's an interesting topic, because you talked about segmenting employees in different groups because they have different aspirations, different needs, different motivations. It's interesting that most companies do this well on the customer side, but what is it such a new concept on the employee side? I honestly think that I think a lot of people wonder that. Why is it such a new concept? I think that organizations organize themselves often to do one or two things really, really well. And if you think about how we were all trained in business classes, business school, if you went there, or organizational master's program or whatever, I think that the training has really done us a disservice in the past, because I was trained about core competencies when I started as a consultant at McKinsey, which is the job I had before going into startups and after being in college. We were trained in core competencies. Companies should do more of what they're really good at. And interestingly, never once did we describe the core competency of a company as being its ability to motivate, engage, and create incredible experiences for its employees. You always think about maybe, how can we outsource this or insource that, or, create a center of excellence for this skill or that skill.
And so I think really over just many, many years of thinking, we've come to think of the employee experience as always being secondary to the customer experience, when those two things are unavoidably linked.
Yes.
You have to have great employee experience to have a great customer experience. And so I guess I don't know how we got to this place where it's so messed up, in my opinion. But I do see a lot of trends, and particularly a generational shift happening, where people are once again, or I should say maybe for the first time, looking at the employee experience as a strategy for growth, not just a nice to have within the context of a bigger strategy.
That's a very good point. Another challenge when it comes to create a culture of collaboration is knowing the personalities and skills of your employees to form high-performing teams. When you have disparate levels of skills and or conflicting personalities, you see a decrease in employee engagements. How do you address this challenge?
Well, that's a terrific question, and as a manager, I think we all get a little. We all come up with our hacks when we're managing. The things that we do to work around the problem. So if you ask yourself the question you just asked, and I don't have the right tools, I try to learn and guess how I might want to adapt to different groups of people or different individuals. I try to, play psychologist and put the right people on the right team, put the right manager with the right individual. And we all sort of play those games. I'm not sure any of us are as good at it as we think we are. To be honest, I'm not a psychologist myself. And so, but we do our best, and often with just really good intent. Meanwhile, when I've interviewed well over 100 companies now in making the plans to launch Structural and launching Structural. And what I found is many of them have a lot of work that they do on personality testing and career planning and other things, but they often take that work and then they put it in a file for forever. I think it's a horrible loss, because the work's been done, but then the employee reads it, talks to their manager, and it sort of goes away.
Yeah.
What we're doing, the approach we're taking at Structural, is to make sure that when I'm going to meet with Eric or Stephanie or Hannah or whomever, that I can look up and see what their personality is in real time, and I can also even get real-time suggestions on how to deal with them as an individual. So, maybe they really like creative brainstorming, or maybe they don't. Maybe they prefer structure in their conversations, and I can actually read that before I go in and talk to an employee now, which is something I would have really liked to have earlier in my career growing GovDelivery, and something I think smart managers would love to have in the palm of their hand today at any size company.
Yeah, and I would say one of the main competitive advantages of any organizations is the people inside this organization. And it's really not only to attract and retain top talent in the organization, is to be able to assemble them in high-performing teams. And as you mentioned, when companies do personality tests, for instance, they tend not to do anything with those. So how does technology, in your minds, enhance or perform better, or help companies perform better when it comes to putting together the right people with the right skills together in order to deliver higher or bring higher performance? Where I think it has real amazing potential is as an aid or a guide or an assistant. So I think of, long term, we would like to see Structural, in my mind, becoming more like a virtual assistant. And I think you're going to see these in a lot of different parts of life. Already I get a note. I have a service I use that's just in a trial period, where it sends me email in the morning with news and updates about all the people I'm meeting with that day. And, that's an incredibly useful. I used to have an assistant who helped me do that. That's an incredible benefit to have a computer doing that kind of work. Well, imagine when you're forming a team, but all the data that's out there, whether it's personality testing or skills or other things, that could be used to help you improve the composition of a team, or even set the right ground rules for a team that's going to function differently. So I'll use an example of that
I learned from a coaching situation, but where I think that a good use of technology could help us in the future. I was in a situation where we were struggling with our engineers and our salespeople to really collaborate effectively. And we had an outside coach come in and give us some tips on how to do this better. And they said, look, you've got a bunch of introverts on a team with a bunch of extroverts, and you're going into the meeting and you're asking questions and you're not giving the introverts time to process. So the extroverts are dominating the meeting. And all we had to do is change the model a little bit, get a simple tip, which was to send out the questions we were going to discuss ahead of time. And the dynamic of the meeting became much more effective. There were a couple other tips wound in there. There's no question that now we have enough data. If we use that data and apply some tools on top of it, I think we can help the composition of teams. We can also help with a big problem in growing companies, which is to prevent managers from dipping into the same well of talent over and over again. Mm-hmm. Managers get very narrow view of the talent in their organization, and they bring the same projects to the same people over and over again. And what technology can do is point out to that manager that there are 5 other people with a similar skill set to Scott. You ought to think about giving one of them the opportunity to come onto this team, not just keep going back to Scott every time you think about it because he happens to be the one you bump into most often at the water cooler.
Right, and I guess it's much easier in a small organization to identify top performers and bring them together. But when you have a much larger organizations, you may not know people in other teams or other departments than your own. And then technology allows to leverage data from different sources to identify the key players and bring them together on a specific project or a specific task.
That's right. Yeah. And you know what? Organizations get a lot stronger when they do that. I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, but I've lost people because we sort of, there's a term of set it and forget it. And there is a very high risk in a low unemployment environment with knowledge workers that if you get really comfortable that somebody's playing a role you want them to play, and they're sort of off in the corner, or maybe they're at their home office, or maybe they're in a field office doing that work, you can lose that employee, not because you weren't nice to them or paid them enough or gave them good positive feedback on their work. You can lose them because you never thought of them for a new opportunity. And I think that technology can do a better job of helping us offer people the kinds of opportunities they want and helping them also promote themselves for those opportunities. And the more of that we have, the better. 2/3 of young workers now say they don't get to do what they're best at work. And that is an unsustainable situation. We got to fix it.
I would agree with that. A celebration and recognition usually give a big boost to a company morale and foster employee engagement and motivation. So how does technology can help automate or personalize such initiatives?
I told you, I love the question. I mentioned earlier that we came up with some, I call them hacks because I'm in technology, some simple shortcuts to do some of the things we thought we needed to do, even when we didn't have technology for them at GovDelivery, as we grew from 0 to 250 people. But I've heard similar stories, companies growing from 0 to 3,000. I think recognition has been thought of in some cases, in very narrow ways within companies. What we saw emerging is a real desire with our employees to recognize each other. And basically what we did is create a program at GovDelivery called the Govies. And we iterated on it a bunch of different times where any employee could recognize another employee. And they had to write up what the employee did, and they had to say how it aligned with our core values. And it would literally just go on a little card that the person could put by their desk. Then we expanded it so that everybody could submit them, and we would vote on we would have a manager of the month, nominate the best 2 or 3 people, and we would feature them at the company meeting and talk about them. And what we found is that was both allowing us to cast a really wide net to support peer-to-peer recognition, to tie it to company values, and also to have that top-down impact, in the end where the CEO or the COO is recognizing an individual. And it was really a home run for us, that recognition program. And it's modeled off some ideas that we borrowed from some other companies. I think what technology can do is just make that easier, faster, and more specific. So one thing we've been promoting with our clients is when you recognize somebody, don't just put, Sarah Smith did a great job on this project, but make sure that there's a link so that people can learn more about Sarah that's posted online, and that you actually are allowing people, when they hear her name mentioned connected to the recognition, that they can go in and learn about it. And then wherever possible, connect that recognition she's had, connect it to her profile, so that going forward, even a month from now or 3 months from now, if somebody new comes in and they want to learn about Sarah, maybe they're looking up information about her in your systems at your company. We want them to see that Sarah's been recognized 4 different times and what she's been recognized for. So you don't just get that one-time bang for your buck, but you actually create that ongoing huge sort of benefit where the asset of recognition and the culture of recognition is building up over time, not just sort of happening once, making people feel great, and they head home and forget about it by Monday.
We talked about data and people analytics, and obviously people and analytics are becoming more and more important on the employee side. Many companies already have customer data, but not so much employee data, or at least employee data they can leverage. So in your mind or in your experience, what should companies do to collect the right data, how to use it to enhance communication and engagement?
It's a great question, and I think that when people hear about collection of data on employees, or even when employees hear about it, I think that there are different reactions. Some people are really comfortable, learn as much about me as possible, and then you can tailor my experience. And then, in the same room, you could gather a group of employees, and in the same room of employees, somebody else will say, I come here, I do my work, I don't want you prying into my data in any way. What I think's changed and evolved recently is that employees are increasingly not just comfortable with, but actually expecting a more tailored experience from everybody they interact with, whether it's Uber or their bank or Google or Facebook or Salesforce.com or their employer. And so we've found recently that employees are getting more and more comfortable with their companies using more data about them, as long as it's used for good. It's used to tailor the experience, and it's used to learn. So our approach, and what I recommend to any other company, is number one, look at the data you have, but before you start putting it all in one place or thinking too much about it, ask yourself, what are the questions I want to be able to answer and that I want my employees and teams to be able to answer with this data that would really help us do our job better, create a better employee experience, better engage people, all those things. And it turns out that it's not about getting more data a lot of the time. It's about just putting together the data you're already gathering. In some cases, when we go into a company, we'll find out there's a couple big holes. Maybe they're not tracking performance very well, or they're not tracking they're not doing any personality testing. But a lot of companies already have all the data they need. They need to think about how they would use it. They need to get it in one place, and they need to engage employees in a conversation of what do you want us to do with this data, and how do you want to use it yourselves? And I think if you kind of you put all those things together, there's a couple of threads that run through things. One is, if you hog the data, if the company gets to use it and the leaders get to use it, but the employees don't, you're not going to be very successful with what you're trying to accomplish in people analytics. And that's held true across many interviews I've done. Companies that just create a database and stuff it in HR, that is not a good approach. So that's one thread I see. And another thread I see is that more is not always better. Having the right amount of data to evaluate, connect, promote, find people, put them on the right projects, put them on the right teams. Having the right amount of data to do those things doesn't mean just gathering more data whenever you can get it. And I kind of tie back, when I think of people analytics, I don't think it's about being able to predict without any error how every single person is going to behave in every single situation. It's about empowering the leaders and empowering the people to get things right more often than they are today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Another pushback, and somewhat related to that topic, is when you talk to CEOs about implementing an employee experience strategy, the big question is, okay, it's a nice idea, it's a good idea, but how do I tie it, or how can I effectively measure the impact on the business, right? So how would you talk to a CEO on trying to convince them or getting them on board to actually implement an EX strategy, and how can you help them measure or tie employee experience to business outcomes?
There's a high level view of this and I think a more spreadsheet view of it. I would tell you at the highest level, humans and leaders are really receptive and aware of the fact that great leaders have better companies. And they know also that great leaders generally are more mindful of employee experience than less engaging leaders. So at the highest level, we all have some examples of this in our own experience. We all see examples at the highest level of companies, Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, or you see the CEO, the guy, Scott Dorsey, who founded ExactTarget, who's now on our board and helped found Structural. You see these people, they're hugely successful. In Scott Dorsey's case, he grew ExactTarget from 0 to a few thousand people, sold it for a couple $1 billion. And, at the highest level, everybody wants to be like that guy, being written up for having a great culture and being beloved by employees who also have great respect and work hard for them at the highest level. The challenge, I think, is that for the guy with a manufacturing firm down the street, it's hard to translate those big victories and well-known kind of billboard companies with somebody's own individual experience. So there's been some work to do that. Harvard Business Review published a study in March of 250 organizations saying that those that invested in space, employee engagement, employee experience, training, culture, technology were 4 times more profitable per employee than those that didn't. And so I think now we're getting closer to the spreadsheet, but it's still not very specific. And then at the very tactical level, when, for our company, we have to actually, when we're talking about using our platform, we have to help people find money for investing in employee experience. And sometimes that gets very specific. And I would say it breaks down in areas that are expected. One is retention. So if you can improve your retention, you generally can really change the cost model that you're using for getting new employees and getting the right employees in. That's the first thing. The second reason to invest in employee experience is recruitment. If your existing employees are having a good experience, they become better ambassadors. So instead of having to hire recruiters, you're able to, basically find people leveraging the people you already have. And then the third piece, which is still harder, is that in specific companies, there are places where you can really find an economic return on employee experience because you are able to pull teams together faster to solve a problem, or pull teams together faster to go win new business, which is, every CEO or CFO wants to either save money or grow revenue when they invest in something new. And when we can show a client that they are going to win more business by investing in employee experience, that's sort of a quick slam dunk, even though I don't think it's the only or even the biggest reason to do it in the long run.
It's a good point, yeah. And when you think of the recruiting process, for instance, on the customer side, we talk about cost per acquisition for customers. When you try to look at bringing or moving customers down the sales and marketing funnel, and you can apply the same tactics to the recruiting process. If your recruiting process takes 6 or 7 weeks and you lose top talents over competitors, or just that the fact that you're not making decisions quicker, or you're not making hiring quicker, then you may lose some sales or productivity enhancement or increase opportunities. Those are pretty easy areas where you can identify a quick ROI if you really do the math.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you can, so I talked to somebody just the other day, big company, and they said, we want to improve recruiting. How does improving employee experience help us with recruiting? And I said, well, what hurts you in recruiting now? And they pointed to their Glassdoor ratings. people really worry about their Glassdoor ratings because new employees are going on to Glassdoor. And for those who aren't familiar with it, which I think is a smaller and smaller number of people these days, but Glassdoor is kind of like Yelp for companies. An employee can go out there, or a former employee can go out there and give you a low star rating or a high star rating and put in some comments about what it's like to work at your company. Well, this particular company was seeing some low star ratings, and they'd had some turnover, they had some other issues, but they also felt like their happy employees weren't putting good reviews, weren't going in and putting reviews up. With a good employee experience, you can draw your employees into, first of all, being happier. And second of all, you can actually encourage them as part of being part of your team and having a great experience at the company that they should go tell that story to others. And imagine if this same company today that's struggling with their Glassdoor ratings, not doing a great job of really engaging their current employees in the recruitment process, if they flipped the model, the Glassdoor ratings were better and the employees became their recruitment ambassadors. Think of the economics in that situation and how much they improve. And it's funny, when I talked about just, lower your recruiting costs, that really didn't resonate for this company. But when you started talking about that whole cycle of things, it made a lot of sense to them. So sorry to go on and on about that, but it's just an area I think we oversimplify. And when you oversimplify, you just end up paying an outside recruiter to go find you the next person without really thinking about your system.
Yes, completely agree on this. So we talked about what the present technology can bring to organizations when it comes to employee engagements, employee experience. Looking forward, how do you see, you've been in the tech world for a long time now, how do you see technology in the near future, let's say maybe the next 5, 10, 15 years, really impacts the employee experience in organizations? And it's a tough question, but do you see when you think about artificial intelligence, chatbots, robotics, and others, what kind of opportunities or even challenge do you see organizations will face in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, the opportunity to me is a little like, it's like the opportunity of being a consumer now. When you're being marketed to as a consumer, you're having an experience that's more personalized and more tailored to you, but it actually involves less human intervention. Mm-hmm. So I have a more personalized experience on the Amazon website than I ever had walking into Best Buy or Target. Think about that, and what a profound shift that is in a decade. It's an amazing shift. And I think when you imagine the employee experience, I think that one opportunity for companies is to really personalize the employee experience at scale. So people get better learning, better coaching, and a lot of better feedback on how to be a good manager, how to be a good employee, how to be successful at their job than they ever had before, but potentially with even less kind of friction in terms of different teams you have to work with or managers you have to work with or, seminars you have to go to or whatever to get that sort of ongoing benefit. Now, if that scares you about, I think some people think when they hear about the robots, taking over that suddenly, one of the risks to the world is going to be that we're not going to have as many employees. We're not going to need as many employees. But actually, what we've seen over time is that innovation opens up as many opportunities as it shuts down. And what my hope and belief is that we can see people doing higher and higher value-added work, more creative work, more knowledge-based work, because a lot of things that we are wasting time on today can be better automated than ever before. And I think that manager check-in sort of daily conversation that a manager needs to have with their employee, that I want my simplest dream is that continues to happen, but that the manager is able to better tailor that to that person's specific needs on that day, because a lot of the basic tending of the employee garden is done much more effectively by these virtual assistants. And it's also done in a way where the employees themselves are empowered to solve the lower end problems and to sort of find their path forward. So by the time the manager is involved, it's about taking things to the next level with human creativity, not about helping you find the right learning video so you can figure out how to use Outlook. How's that that's the best I can do as a futurist. I'm really paid. I'm really paid to do things in the present.
No, it's good because, there's always a conflict between the anti and the pro technology. The anti-technology think that whatever technology advances come to us, they will replace human interaction. The pro technology see those as enhancements to human interactions, right? Make it more efficient, more streamlined. There's always this conflict between people who don't like or are afraid of technology and people actually who embrace technology. And I don't think we'll never get aligned on this in organizations, but I really believe, like we've seen on the customer side, that organizations that actually embrace technology see bigger results of engagement and retention and advocacy with their customers, and they will do the same with the employees as well.
Yeah, look at this. This HBR work is, it's I think still the beginning of this kind of body of work around what employee engagement really means and the kind of ROI that happens when you invest in, the full employee experience more than just taking a survey to find out if your employees are happy. But the numbers that they're seeing of, for companies that are investing in the space their employees work in, the tools that they're able to use to connect with each other and to get their job done. That HBR study, which for those of you who are interested, it's called Why the Millions We Spend on Employee Engagement Buy Us So Little. The article was published by Jacob Morgan, March 10th, 2017. When you look at it and see that companies are potentially 4 times more profitable when they get this right, I think it really underscores your point that you can step back. You might not like tackling, but if you choose to get on a football field, you better choose to tackle and participate. And I think that in this world, whatever your thoughts are on technology, there is undeniable evidence that companies that invest in doing things on the, if not the cutting edge of technology, at least the thoughtful edge, that those companies reap huge benefits. And I think that's true in employee experience now, just like it was true in manufacturing innovation 60, 80 years ago.
Completely agree. So now we're getting close to the end, but let me ask you a couple of fun questions before we conclude this interview today. If you were to go back in time, if you had the ability to go back in time, which era would you go back to? And why?
I would unquestionably go back to the American Revolution, the time just before the American Revolution. And I would go back because I think that some fairly ordinary men, but people who were well-rounded in their education and their perspective, from agriculture to business to, Benjamin Franklin as a printer. I think that an opportunity to interact with some of those heroes of our country and of the world would just be extraordinary. And then hopefully you could follow Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson over to France and understand understand what their influences were over there at that time. I just read a biography of Franklin, so it's fresh on my mind. But I just think these relatively ordinary people choosing a path forward, coming from a business background, enabling commerce and all of these things that have made America and so many Western countries possible in how they plan things out, it would be hard to pass up on a chance to go back there. Otherwise, I'd go back to the concert when Bob Dylan went electric for the first time, but I wouldn't want to waste my one chance on that. So I'd have to pick American Revolution.
Okay, that's interesting. What is the thing that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
My kids. I always take with me the appreciation of just being on vacation and the mindset. Sometimes I bring my computer, sometimes I don't, sometimes the Kindle, sometimes a book. But I think it's very important in life to be in the moment. And whether I'm sitting here talking to you or on vacation, I try to just appreciate that moment. And when I head out on vacation, I make sure that I'm in the mindset of being on vacation as much as possible and being there rather than being 70% in the office and 30% making sure my kids don't drown on the beach or something.
If you were to recommend one business book, which one would it be?
For me, I think that people underlearn how other people think and underappreciate how other people think. And there's a book I really like, just kind of a commercial psychology book called Influence. And so I'd probably recommend that. I think it helps you understand that people have different ways that they're motivated, and that there are some really great ways that you can help people better understand and care about your ideas. And I like that book because it's accessible for those of us who aren't, psychology majors in college or master's degrees, and it's been really useful to me in that way. Also, it's very helpful for getting your spouse to do what you want. So I've probably used it for evil in that case, but for good in all others.
That's funny. And final question is, what is your favorite food?
Ice cream. Just there's nothing I enjoy more than ice cream, and I don't like to run that much, but I run specifically so I can eat as much ice cream as I want.
What ice cream?
Right now there's a lot of homemade ice cream around now, and so we have a really good shop by our house that has some good things. Otherwise, if I'm just at a store, peanut butter chocolate. I'll always go for peanut butter chocolate if they have it.
Good, always love chocolates. For those who want to learn more about you and Structural, what is the way for them to follow you on social media?
On Twitter, I'm at SM Burns, M as in Matthew, BURNS, and generally tweeting about our local economy and tech scene here in Minnesota and other things I care about, and then, of course, employee experience. And then, late night thoughts, I guess, otherwise. And then I'm out. I do publish on LinkedIn occasionally, so you can find me on LinkedIn at Scott M. Burns. And then structural.com is probably the other good spot to find out more about me and us.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.